Hey, Dennis, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks much for having me.
Absolutely. So just to start off, I was hoping to see if we could have you do a little introduction to yourself and kind of who you are.
Ooh, yes. Do I have half an hour? Then I can do the grand backdrop of exactly how awesome my mom think I am. But the short version is certainly one for where I've spent the last now 24 years working startups. And this is my fifth venture, x.ai, and we've been working on this for the last about 5 years. And it's this idea that we certainly believe we can build this intelligent agent that can go schedule meetings on your behalf, so you don't have to. One of those little chores that end up in your inbox that you certainly know how to do, but if you could choose, you'd rather be without that little chore. And if I were to create any theme across those 5 ventures that we've done, it would be that most of them would have some strong data backdrop for where we figured out a source of data and how to potentially extract value from that.
Interesting.
Or shorten the whole thing down to I'm just a geek who likes to do tech in his spare time.
There you go. Well, I mean, you love to start things from scratch. I mean, that's a lot of. I looked at the LinkedIn background. You have gotten into a lot of different aspects in startups and acquisitions. So obviously, lots of success.
There's something almost romantic, in my opinion at least, about that first 0 to 10 employees on any new venture, for where you got no money, no customers, no revenue, nobody loves you. The whole thing is complete uphill. But that struggle, I do find some romance in that struggle, because if you can overcome it, it's almost like sport, for where you're not supposed to win today, but somehow through good prep, you ended up winning the game anyway. So I do find that rather romantic, even though sometimes when you're in it, it is perhaps not as romantic as when you think back of some 18 months you spent in some basement on some product with a little prospect. But we've been somewhat fortunate over the years to extract some value and some good exits out of those startups.
Interesting. So when you go back and you look at when you started x.ai, what was the original, I guess, the romantic idea of why you would have started this particular venture? What was that frame of mind?
So I don't think and this is of course all opinion. We all have our own processes and tactics for why and how we go start new things. But I'm not so sure you should start things because you fall in love. I think you should start things because you've somehow stumbled into a pain that somehow you either just can't craft a future where you have to do this again and again and 1,000 times over. So my little idea list is really just a list of hate, for where I keep a list on my phone. Whenever I stumble into something which I don't like, I add it to my list. So it's really just a very negative list, or really just a young boy who isn't very happy, who somehow got a piece of paper and a pen and just started writing. That is my list. And then once every blue moon, I'll go back, typically post-exit of some of our ventures, and take a look at that list. And what you'll see is then 4 years of this angry boy just taking notes. And when we sold our last company back in 2013, I went back and took a long look at that list again. And what I found was that on not 1 or 2 occasions, but a dozen or so occasions, I've taken note of this. Why am I sitting at 11 p.m. in my underwear on a Thursday night trying to plan a meeting for next week, Wednesday, 1 o'clock? I said, I must somehow have better talents than having to do this. And sure, there's all sorts of kind of solutions to that. Go spend 60K of your money to hire some sort of assistant, Tom, who can do it for you. But I was always kind of too entrepreneurial, too frugal to go hire somebody to do that for me. I said, I'd much rather hire half an engineer, and then I'll just fucking do those meetings myself at 11 p.m. on a Thursday night. So when I looked at that list, it just came back so often that I thought it was at least worthy some exploration to see whether it was just a nifty idea or something that could potentially be implemented. And then we brought the team back together first days of 2014 to do some of that exploration.
When you're looking at that list and you've obviously curated years, a couple of years of pain of dealing with repetitive tasks and stuff you just don't want to have to do yourself again. When it comes to looking at those 2-3 ideas that start percolating up, that you're like, what's the thought process in the trade-offs of looking, one versus the other?
So I try to call in a set of experts. So depending on the idea, you could typically assemble a handful of experts around that idea, whether that be on the data science end, on the business end, on some particular infrastructure challenge that you might think come attached to it, but certainly a set of experts. And those experts, and if I look at my last venture, I invited 6 people over to New York for a full week. Their only job is to try to disprove the idea. Don't come here and pat me on the back. As in, I can very easily, as an entrepreneur, fall in love. As in, you and me, if we talk for another 2 hours, we can agree to do a venture this weekend. As in, I'm that entrepreneurial. So that is the easy part. The much harder part is to somehow tell me not to do it. So their job now is to tell me that here are all the obstacles, certainly as an expert, that I see. If you don't have a good answer, you would be crazy to start. And my job now is to make sure that when I go into that meeting, whether that be a week long or a weekend long, that I'm prepped to the degree where there's nothing which they can say that can disprove it. And if I can somehow survive that session, then the idea survives. Whether we then do it, that comes on to that next set of kind of processes that you put in place to kind of validate an idea. But that's certainly the bigger hurdle. And plenty of ideas will die in that phase, for where you fell in love, you spend a month, fall in love even harder, and then upon 4 hours in, the 7 things you knew or thought you knew were just disproved. And at least you're so lucky that you only spent, a week or a month on it, not 5 years of your life.
Absolutely. Do you then? And I'm curious because it sounds like that's a pretty rigorous process. I mean, you've gone through this multiple times. When you're actually executing at the company day to day, do you have a similar structure that you like? Because obviously, it sounds like you do like the romantic side of embracing the idea and kind of running with it. Is there an internal structure around you now to kind of that check and balance of making sure that even as the product's launching, that you stay focused?
So I am not a fan of the pivot or this whole idea that a startup upon success is rarely what it was the day it started. And to me, that doesn't ring true. As in, a startup is not supposed to survive at all costs. As in, I think the most natural outcome for any startup is that it goes tits up. And we should just accept that as a fact. And there should be no kind of negative thoughts attached to that. Again, just like in sports, where if you win all your games, I'm not sure you're in the right league. So you're supposed to lose, and probably lose often. That is how you kind of move upwards. And this idea of pivoting away from what you started on just, again, doesn't ring true to me. So I certainly like to make sure that whatever we started out with, as in what it was that we wanted to solve, we continue trying to solve that, perhaps to the degree where we can now conclude with confidence that it cannot be solved. And or, hey, hell yeah, we kind of solved it. And now we can kind of try to extract a few monies from the market with whatever solution we put in place, but not the idea of moving away from it. So if there's anything that I try to stick to day, is that whole set of no's, right? We should not do this, not that. That's not what we set out to do. Doesn't mean it's a bad idea. It's just not for us. So certainly when I speak to investors, new candidates, press, whoever want to speak to me about what we do, it is always one where, Dennis, tell me what you're going to do when you grow up. As in, scheduling meetings? How important is that? Is that even a company? And for us, that's what we do. We schedule meetings, no more, no less. As in, I'd much rather be somewhat good, potentially world-class at one thing, than kind of half-assed at 7 things. I haven't really heard of anybody who won on being kind of half good at 7 things. I've heard on a few people who won on being really good at one thing. So I'd much rather take that risk.
Yeah, interesting. So I'm gonna continue that, but one question to go back. So the other previous startups, was the process the same? So I guess going back to the first startup, you hadn't had an exit. When you established that, was the process the same in terms of bringing in and having that initial idea being challenged?
Let me answer that in 2 ways. One, there's this Peter Thiel, Silicon Valley idea that you only do a startup if you somehow stumble into something for where you simply can't exist without you doing it. And if not that, then don't go about doing it. And entrepreneurship is not a career, it's a calling, and all sorts of things that will rhyme with that. I tend to disagree. I actually do think entrepreneurship can be a career, and if anything, probably should be a career. As in, why is it that we accept, say, a VC fund with some X amount of millions of dollars, go invest in 20 some odd startups, and 16 of them should go belly up and 2 of them sideways, and you get 1 or 2 winners, which will suggest that of a pool of many startups where they supposedly pick the 20 better ones, there's still only 1 or 2 winners. If you and me then say we only do 1, that seems like crazy talk. As in, who are we to believe that the very one that we pick the very first time will be a winner? That seems not right. So what we probably should do, if you want to use the VC analogy, is not run the kind of 4-year horizon for where they go invest in 20 startups, because we can't do that as entrepreneurs. So we need to do them not in parallel, but in serial. So I'm running the 50-year fund for where I can do 10 startups over 50 years. And if I do that, I should also accept that most of them probably won't work out, but some of them will. And some of those who do kind of go well will pay for the ones that didn't go so well. We just happen to be so fortunate that some of our early startups did quite well, and we have a reasonably good kind of batting average, I think you'll call it here in the US, up until this point. But the idea is still honest, I think, which is that you should run this as a career over a long period of time. So having said that, and then to kind of answer your question, I think if you know everything on your first startup, you're probably a little bit naive. But if you do it 5 times over, you should also expect that you become slightly better from one venture to the next. Doesn't mean that it is not risky on the 5th one. It is still extremely risky, but you certainly have some education that you brought from one venture to the next that you can utilize and take advantage of. So whatever process I did back 24 years ago when we started our first venture, it was certainly not as rigorous, and perhaps we stumbled around a little bit more than I would have liked if I could kind of go back in time. But I think that was just part of the education and the idea that you running this as a career. And I'm now halfway through, and I'm good. I get to kind of do another 5, and I'll talk to you when I'm 68.
There you go. Yeah, it's funny. I listened to some of Gary Vaynerchuk's podcasts, and he has a very similar thesis on the macro being 50, 60 years and several careers within that span. So it's interesting how you're looking at it as the race is not a 2 to 4 year window. It's a 50 year, and you might have multiple startups, and within that phase, you might have the successes and expectations or failures are learning pinpoints.
And I think some people will find it hard to kind of mentally sign up for some idea of this being a 50-year journey, because that sounds beyond scary, as in almost like some sort of experience of drowning, for where I just can't think 50 years into the future. I can barely think 18 months into my future and what my kind of career will look like. But then again, if you ask people if they spent the last 7 years becoming an architect, can you see a life for where you work in or around architecture and then at some point kind of call it quits? The only thing they will kind of challenge on that is the calling it quits. I said, no, I can see myself spend a life around that. It might not be the same thing, but I can see myself spend a life around that. And I think if you can perhaps reframe it, I can certainly see it. I was never really scared to kind of see a life around entrepreneurship, not one for where you need to sit in this basement for 50 years working on this one particular code base. That sounds perhaps scary / sad, but a life around entrepreneurship sounds kind of awesome, like a life well lived.
So you're a serial entrepreneur. You've got a very interesting view of the journey. I think being in love with the journey, the process, more than anything else. And obviously, you've had a lot of successes, but the driver, for some, it's fear, and I think it goes in a counterbalance of being an entrepreneur. You can't be fearful and be an entrepreneur because you're not going to optimally make that risk, that assessment to take advantage of opportunity. As your personal self, because of your entrepreneurial viewpoint, are you risk averse, or are you somebody that just views risk as a part of just any decision, any process?
I'm certainly not risk averse, and I don't think you can be an entrepreneur if you are risk averse. It doesn't mean that you should take unnecessary risk or silly risk. Those are just poor decisions. But I don't think, and perhaps if you just take a step back, and you have certainly seen this, I am sure, that some people will attach their life's worth to the success of their company. As in, if the company is killing it, they are not just happy, but ecstatic. But if the company is doing the opposite, they're not sad, they are depressed. And neither of those two, I think, are right. Again, I think it's one for where you should really enjoy it. As in, if you're a professional footballer, I think you should just really like the idea of you playing football. If you like just playing football, whether you are training or playing on Saturday, hey, that's all part of me just living a good life. Somehow I ended up doing exactly what I wanted to do. And if you ask me, I wanted to be a tech entrepreneur, and all I want to do is just play the game. Doesn't mean that the game is without risk, or I don't understand that losing comes along with this particular game. Of course it does, but that shouldn't frighten you. That should just be a learning experience, if anything else. Just don't make silly choices along the way for where you put up the house as collateral when not necessary, or whatever other silly decision you can make along the way that makes it way more difficult to do the next venture.
Yeah, I think that's what happens a lot of times. You see I think people innately, we try to avoid risk. That's, I think, our human nature. I think there's some that can see through the risk and still see the right decision. And then it depends how much you're leveraging yourself to attain your goal. And then it's the undue pressures that you can't quite cope with, that tax bill comes due, and you're not making the right decisions for the macro of whatever thesis you're working on.
I agree on that. But I also think this is something that you can go train on, for where if you are slightly uncomfortable in whatever setting is necessary in some entrepreneurial backdrop, you can go train on that. If somehow you are just a little bit uncomfortable in calling customers, and you think that the venture is somehow hinging on you being able to speak to these customers, once you call the first 100, you are not as uncomfortable as when you call the first one. And that is a muscle that you can train like any other thing. Then there's certain things for where that might just be a requirement to be an entrepreneur. So as you walk into this career, you should probably just accept the fact that that is a skill I need to have. And if you're a professional footballer, there's certain skills for wherever you're on the field, whether a forward or a defender, you need certain skills, and there's no cheating on those skills. So you should kind of start training those even ahead of you doing your first venture. And we can pick any number of the first 10 things that are necessary. So you can certainly not run a venture without having some form of sales skill. And you might not be the salesperson. I got a CS degree, but you cannot not sell if you want to do a venture. You need to sell your co-founder, sell your family, sell your first customer, sell the first candidate, sell the press. You need to sell everybody all the time. And if you're uncomfortable in selling them your story, then it might not be the right career for you. If you know that that is necessary and you want to be good at it, hey, now figure out how you can best train against that so that it becomes way less uncomfortable come tomorrow and the day after.
Interesting. So you mentioned being good at one thing and meetings, and actually on a side note, when we were scheduling a conversation to talk, I know the AI assistant Amy I mentioned to you responded, and it took me a little bit of time to comprehend that it wasn't a real person. It was a virtual assistant. So when you are doing one thing, you're doing it well, and x.ai is apparently a fantastic product for booking meetings. I've experienced it firsthand. When you're talking to investors and potential employees, how do you phrase "we're going to do meetings really well"? Like how do you pose that to somebody for them to realize that there's such a broad market for such a narrow AI focus?
It's actually a very good question, right? For where I'm sure that anybody listening to this, if they're also engineers or just in or around engineers, selling them on the idea that they should come work at a company for where we do meeting scheduling for a living is really an uphill battle. As in, the last thing they want to do is sit in yet another meeting. Dennis, bugger off. I said, I'm not working on that. I hate it. And if I can get that emotion, and that comes often easily, then I think without them immediately knowing it, they're hooked. As in, yeah, you got it. I hate it as well. That's why we're here. There might just be this opening in time for where if somebody comes along crazy enough to say, I'm going to sit in that basement for 5 years, then this chore might just disappear. Just like there was a time for where if I needed to sign a contract, I would sign something on a printed piece of paper, fax it over to you, you would sign it and fax it back. That just disappeared. As in, that was another little chore if I needed to walk up the hall and find a fax machine. But over kind of half a decade, we blinked and nobody barely knows what that was like. As in, even as I say it out loud now, that sounds like, Dennis, that was decades ago. No, it was not. That's like 6, 7 years ago. This might just be the same for where 2 days ago, when you replied back to that email saying, I can do next Wednesday at 1, if not that, we can do 3, can you come by my office? That email might just disappear. You and me can make that happen. And if there's anything, me included, that really get people hooked or get all of us hooked, is that if there's some sort of glory attached to what we do, whether that be winning the game or making how small a dent in the universe, but as in some glory attached to it. And I think what we have here is at least the opportunity. The most likely outcome is that next time we speak, we died, and that's fine. But there's certainly some opportunity here that, hey, you know what? I did speak to Dennis 4 years ago, and now somehow the world changed. This whole idea of doing email ping pong just disappeared. Of course it did. And as I'm sure you can imagine here, there's some really strong network effects to what we do for where there's probably some sort of very slow start. And at some inflection point, there'll be an explosion. I would like to be on the winning side of that explosion, but that's not the point. The point is that as I CC'd in Amy for this particular meeting, I said, you know what? I'm up for a chat. I CC'd in Amy, she can put something on my calendar for half an hour, come next week, so on and so forth. Whatever I said, we can go back and have a look. And you received an email. Your response should have been, oh, awesome. I've CC'd in Andrew on my end. He can hash it out with Amy. But if Andrew is Amy, who the hell is she talking to? She's talking to herself. It becomes instant. And you and me never need to do anything but just agree we want to talk. And then we can start to say things like, Amy, can you get me and the product design team together early next week for half an hour over Skype? As I click send, blink, blink. Oh, next Tuesday, 3:30. and here's the Skype details. That is sexy. I said, that is the world we want to live in. So that, coming back full circle, is what I think sometimes have people say, Dennis, I'm up for that. I actually like the dramatic focus applied here. If anything, I kind of dislike the kind of zigzagging we're doing at my current company, for where we're kind of all over the place and doing a few things here and there. And it's not bad, but it's not great either. This, though, I can die on this sword, but I can tell people whatever sword I died on. Not just, I did some engineering for a couple of years, it didn't work out. No, I tried to solve this problem. We were heroes. We didn't survive, though, but we tried.
Amazing. It's interesting, just as you're mentioning, having Amy and Andrew, and they're just figuring it out. And I was just thinking, so the application, via email was very seamless. Do you see the application tapping into Siri or Hey Google or an Alexa, so that it's literally you just speaking in your office? Hey, can you, the product and the engineering teams at next week sometime, can we schedule that? Is that the future of how x.ai can really help schedule?
So I think we might be able to kind of categorize the upcoming agents into two buckets. There'll be some set of horizontal AIs, the Alexas, the Cortanas, the Bixbys, Google Assistant, and the one from Apple, which is right next to me, so I'm not going to say the name. And they will be able to kind of answer questions or take in requests for where there's some immediate action, like, hey, assistant, can you set my alarm for tomorrow morning, 6:20 a.m., please? And they'll be able to kind of set that alarm. But those are kind of a thin layer of instructions. Then I think it's likely to see these kind of vertical AIs that are hyper-specialized and only able to do one thing, but do that one thing extremely well. And it can take in not just instructions with kind of direct outputs, but objectives. Like, you and me want to meet up for an hour at my office when you're in Manhattan come first week of January. As in, there's multiple true outcomes to that. But you and me have already agreed what we want. Then the agent just needs to figure out how to kind of solve for that. And that, I think, is likely to happen. I'd like us to be one of them, as we kind of are in the kind of meeting scheduling space. But there'll be 10,000 other highly specialized vertical AIs right next to us, doing your receipts, doing your travels, submitting simple tax forms, and so on and so forth. But I certainly don't imagine some sort of all-knowing AI from Google that comes out tomorrow in some sort of ta-da moment where anything which I can imagine, whatever job I want done, it'll be able to do that job. That doesn't sound realistic to me. I think it's going to be this combination, almost like the App Store, but of kind of specialized agents. Now, to then answer your question, then I think it will be some sort of relationship where you should think of these verticalized AIs as opposed to having somebody on payroll, just not at $100K a year, but at $8 a month. And in that regard, you'll be able to say things like, hey, Alexa, could you have Amy reach out to Tom and John to get something in the calendar for end of next week for an hour to discuss the new UX designs? And that means Alexa now needs to know, I cannot do this, but I also know we've got somebody on payroll called Amy. They may package this request, reach out to Amy, give her the job. She'll then reach out and try to solve that job either instantly, if she works for all of them, or reach out and do it over the next, on average, 1.9 day because guests are tardy. And upon solving it, package that and go back to Alexa and say, hey, remember that thing you asked me about on Monday? I've solved that. You can go back to your boss and say so. And that suggests that you as an employee will probably end up becoming an instant manager right out of college. You don't want to have any human employees. You have kind of 7 AI employees that you need to figure out how to hire, train, and employ well. And upon moving to another kind of workplace, you'll take them with you as some sort of reference of who you are, how you work, why they should employ you.
So your thought is that it makes sense. I mean, as in the concept of the narrow AI, I think the broad, all-knowing AI that was on sci-fi 10, 20, 30 years ago seems very difficult to attain. But having a framework where there's a structure around allowing you to access these narrow AI agents and assembling your own assistant sounds like it's a much more feasible. I know in the legal field similar things are happening, and from that standpoint, I think it sounds like you're executing on a very, again, your premise of be good at one particular thing. So right now, I know you guys are more on the corporate side, dealing with applications of, recruitment, scheduling into businesses, sales side. My wife and I, to schedule anything, whether it's using a personal assistant on these devices, still requires us to go back and forth. Is the product able to leave the B2B business space maybe and help on the personal side of coordinating the same?
I think so. I believe a good analogy perhaps would be that of Dropbox 10 years ago. So at some point, it seemed extremely natural and sane to save all your files on your laptop because, hey, you just pay for it. And those 128 gigabytes, they're mine. And then over the next kind of decade, it became completely insane if you saved any files on your laptop. And if you do that at any moment in time, you should really be rethinking how you manage your files because they're all now in the cloud. And most of that, at least initially, started out with people needing to share big ass files. And there were certainly some verticals that would gravitate towards that faster than others. And they kind of propelled it into the organizations. And then it became normal just for the account manager to share a simple kind of Word doc that he could have emailed. But now, you know what? I don't like the idea of having 7 versions in my inbox. So I'm going to share one file instead. And then over time, it became normal for you and me just going to have our family pictures somewhere in the cloud and not on a zip drive, right? So I do think there'll be some sort of trajectory for where we certainly see ourselves do well within the enterprise and within companies, or just really with any type of knowledge worker. And I do imagine then at some point, and we even see this today, it will just spill into kind of the outside workplace as well. And we have students and professors and mommy groups and what have you also using Amy, but it's certainly, I would say, the vast majority who use it for very traditional business meetings. I need to do a product demo. I need to do a recruitment call. I need to do a kind of check-in. I need to do a support call. Any number of those things that just happens to kind of run any type of company. That's what we fit really well. That's only what we designed it for to begin with. But we do see also, as a footnote, that most people actually connect 2 calendars. They connect their business calendar because that's how I do my work. But they also connect their personal calendar because once every kind of 4 weeks, there's that PTA meeting at the school. I would like to kind of be the good dad, so I do add that to my personal calendar. But rather like Amy to not book on top of that. But I don't want to put that on my business calendar, but I want her to be aware of it. So she'll kind of go look at 2 calendars. So that we certainly see, and that's perhaps that first initial kind of overlap.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I mentioned to you before we started recording that I'm super eager to see how we can integrate this in our process. I know I reached out right before the holidays. I've been thinking about it because as a recruiting company, we do a lot of schedule and coordination. We use Calendly, HubSpot, whatever meetings to set. But I just think the back and forth with our clients who do share calendars with us has, adds probably 10% minimum overhead to our personal week. And I think this would be a great solution for us personally.
So this is bias alert. So this is where I think we are certainly unique. So we provide all of the kind of usual meeting types where you can have a meeting type called screening, and it will have some kind of constraints attached to it. You do it these days, these times, this duration, that Zoom link, and so on and so forth. And that's all good and fine. And you probably set up the same in the kind of apps that you just mentioned. But there's many times, and in particularly in recruiting, where there's a different taste for how eager you are to close something with a particular candidate. And sometimes you'll have the upper hand, and sometimes, you know what, you won't have the upper hand. And it's the same with me, for where if I want to go meet some investor at some moment in time for where we're raising some capital, I accept the fact that I don't have the upper hand. So you want to be able to create instant constraints for this particular person. And I'll say things like, hey, Amy, instead of a meeting with Josh from SoftBank at some time next week between 8 a.m. and 9 p.m., we'll meet at his office. That's not really a meeting type I do often. But for him, at this moment, what I want is complete flexibility. Me going to his office, max hours available. He can then decide, obviously, not to do the meeting at 9 p.m. if he doesn't want to, but I'm certainly available. But I'm not giving that to everybody because I don't want to hang around the office until 10 p.m. every day. So that I actually do like, and I think the ability to kind of be slightly more personal. And again, this meeting was very similar, for where I think we somehow agreed to do it this week and not last week. And I pushed it to this week by saying so, even though had you looked at my calendar, I'm sure you could have squeezed in kind of 45 minutes somewhere. But I didn't want that. So I said, hey, do something next week. And then she'll package that. So that's certainly where I think we are unique. Bias alert over.
Yeah, that was cool. Yeah, no, 100%. Like that was, I think that's exactly it. Because I was, you said next week, and all of a sudden your whole calendar just changed and shifted to availability for next week. And I thought that was really interesting, because a lot of the dialogue we have with clients or candidates is, I can meet today. It's next week. I have 2 hours free this day, and then you're doing the calendar hunt and you're trying to find a slot that works for them most of the time. So I think the fact that the product's smart enough to just instantly figure that out. I mean, that's just it's just ridiculous that we're doing it manually. I think now I'm starting to realize.
Yeah, and here's the funny thing: many people see an agent like Amy and Andrew as certainly agents who will help you put things on your calendar, and that's what we built them to do. And if you're in sales or recruiting or account management, customer success, and 17 other kind of verticals, that's all good and fine. If you're a hardcore back-end infrastructure engineer, the last thing you want, as we talked about, is a meeting on your calendar. But you should probably, of all people, then go employ Amy and Andrew. If you really dislike meetings, then you need an assistant. If anything, the very people who are so lucky to kind of win the corporate lottery and get human assistants, they actually don't use their human assistants to get shit on their calendar. They use it to protect their calendar, because my time is valuable. So if you ask that back-end infrastructure engineer really would like to keep a open space to get work done, why don't you hire Amy and Andrew? Somehow set it up so that you only do meetings on Wednesday and Thursday, and you only do it after 11. So whenever you CC and Amy, nobody can steal any time in your calendar that you're not comfortable with. And all of a sudden it becomes not a more my calendar agent, but a protector that will make sure that you get the maker time that you deserve. So I think there's actually the reverse picture as well.
Yeah, actually, it'd be interesting. I think sometimes when I hear candidates are interviewing, I think I'd like to tell them maybe you should sign up for x.ai and schedule your interviews and know when you're available and let the product handle it for you.
So we see this with typically with strong talent all the time, for where they many times either are senior, got the upper hand, are comfortable, not hunting for the next paycheck, and for them, I have some specific hours I'm willing to kind of dedicate to this idea of me potentially go working somewhere else. If you can work within that, I'll be happy to do a chat. But it's within these constraints. And then perhaps something comes along where they want to open it up a little bit, and then they go do that. We do have this lust, though, and easy ability to kind of go, if you meet often, like every 2 weeks, we are roped into some project, we need to speak, could even be a recruiter-candidate relationship. Signing up so you're both on it will make sure that neither of you would have to speak to Amy, but only kind of the availability of the hiring company needs to be kind of extracted. So we tend to see people who meet often for whatever the reason, typically because they are on the same project, they both sign up kind of in pairs. Because then, okay, at least we have this agent who will forever know when we have overlaps, then we can go kind of hunt for the other one.
Interesting. Yeah, that's. I think the use cases are. I think protecting the calendar. You mentioned the assistant. That's the main job, and I think that's actually an interesting use case because, from my mind, I was thinking, oh, it's going to help me get because I know if it's a candidate who mentioned is comfortable as passive, they have the leverage in the relationship. But I think on the flip side, I do get a lot of candidates that book time through these different booking meetings, and they're not at the opportune times. And I know there's some flexibility they want, but I think having a protection over not just blocking the calendar off for the 2 hours on my calendar for everyone is difficult because it arbitrarily has blocked 10 to noon off for every human. But if it's like 10 to noon, except for maybe these particular people, then I think that'd be very powerful to protect myself while still giving myself flexibility.
And we even now I'm in full on sales mode. I'm so sorry, but this is because we have this concept called VIPs for where you and me have a number of people for where they have probably the same amount of right to book things on our calendar as we do. Say, let's pick somebody dramatic. Say my wife. She could pick any time on my calendar within reason and make sure that I turn up, right? And you probably have something similar for if somebody pays you $15,000 a month to sit here and do some work, they could probably suggest that we meet up tomorrow at 4. So there should be this idea. They can just email Amy and say, hey, can you get me and Tom together tomorrow afternoon, please? And it needs no verification from your end because you have already designated them as VIPs, your boss, your wife, the two kind of major customers, and even just tell your customers that I told my assistant that you are a VIP and you can email them at 3 a.m. She'll help get something on the calendar. I don't need to approve it. That's an kind of, I think, interesting feature that again kind of carries over this idea that it's somewhat similar to have hired somebody. You're just paying either $0 or a few bucks for it.
Yeah, no, interesting. It's a fascinating product. I think the use cases, while the technology is narrow, like it does one thing really well. It's very interesting how, you've obviously the product is well thought out. I like the concept of the VIP because scheduling, as I mentioned with my wife, is always difficult with work because she can't see my work calendar. And it's always a texting game back and forth. And this would be interesting because then she can literally book anything she wants and I don't have to worry about that back and forth with her.
You should.
Yeah, I will. Like I said, we're on the side now. I like the product. We're going to definitely test it out. I know you're busy. I know you've got a constraint. I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you for being on. I think fascinating your journey and views on entrepreneurship. But I think the product itself is really just a great application of what AI can do if it's doing one thing and it's doing it well.
And again, be fully aware that there's some sort of bias attached to this, but forget about whether you want to become one of our users. I certainly think of all of the solutions out there. If you want to fool around with AI just a little bit to get some exposure outside of what you can read in Wired magazine, go sign up. It's free forever for x.ai. Try to send in a couple of kind of meeting requests just to kind of get a feel for. So how is it? And how does it feel when I write this machine agent? And what were some of my worries or anxieties? Because that, I think, will make you slightly stronger in that kind of next conversation at work or elsewhere when people talk about AI, because this is something you can actually touch. So we read about this all the time, but a lot of it we can't really touch. This you can. And then if I'm lucky, you fall in love. But the point is really just, it's an easy, cheap way to kind of test the AI in December 2019.
Yeah, and it's interesting to that, Dennis, is I think I was speaking to somebody else about the applications AI, and it's getting AI implemented at a cost that everyone can adopt is really the end goal versus the high, pie in the sky concepts of what AI might do 3 to 5 years from now at exorbitant costs.
I also want that self-driving car. I also find it extremely sexy. I also read those articles every week. It somewhat seems that it's going to come out next year, but they said that 10 years ago, and they'll say it next year as well. I don't think we should stop chasing it, but we still need I think, to try to take advantage of whatever's possible today, December 2019. And I think this is one of those applications. There's many others as well, but this is certainly one of them. And that I find interesting outside of my office bias here.
Absolutely. No, that's I do like the use case of it, and I think it's a very interesting product. And like I mentioned, I'm definitely going to sign up to try it out. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Time well spent.
Absolutely.
Thanks much. Cheers.
Thank you. Cheers.